Hi there. You caught me having a cup of tea. So yeah, I have got a support session tonight, which is Authentic Success Action the Dip. It's funny, it's actually quite dark here and I've gone a bit grainy. And I'm so used to it being so bright and sunny that I forget that I might even need a light on in here. But it kind of matches my mood because I'm actually not feeling great today. And I did think about cancelling this. And I thought, do you know what I'm going to do? Is I'm going to do a really short live if nobody joins me, and take a dip myself. So this support session is all about authentic success action, the dip. And there's a video workshop that's on YouTube you can go and do. You may have seen some of the little clips about it. And it's not about just, taking a dip and putting your toe in the water in the sea, literally. It's about doing that figuratively or as an analogy. And so when we're going towards our authentic success, sometimes, with awareness, we have an idea of something that might be calling us, that we might want to do. And sometimes what we need to do is we need to take a tiny, tiny action just to see if it really is the right thing for us. And very often, what happens when we do that, we get some really strong feelings as to, yes, this is for me, no, this isn't for me, or it can bring up all kinds of things for us. So sometimes we take that tiny action and we can be really, really triggered, we could say, not necessarily just by, say, PTSD when we talk about triggers. It could trigger all kinds of other emotions. It can trigger grief, or just memories and things that we've forgotten about. I've got a really nice reflection thing going on here where you kind of see yourselves going on infinitely in my glasses. As you see, I made a lot of effort today. I've got the wiggly hair, but I thought, let me just show up and be really sort of honest about how I'm feeling today. um, and with the dip, and I say go and do the video workshop because I talk in there about lots of ways that we can do the dip and how we can be safe while we do it. um, and sometimes it's about not doing things. So sometimes our action is about actually stopping doing certain things or saying no to things as well. So, but I think sometimes we talk about things and it can feel very complicated. And actually, in practice, I think we know and we understand instinctively what it is to take that little, dip that toe in the water and take a little try. Um, Certainly, all the shops know it because you go in and they have all these little tasters of things on sticks or little glasses of things. And I went to a festival at the weekend, not that kind of festival, but it was really nice. And a lot of the stands had little tasters, or they come and you had like, face creams and they're trying to squeeze the face cream on your hand. They want you to really check it out. Because we know that if we take that little taster, if it's for us, we'll often jump right in then and buy things once you've had the little taste. Um, and yeah, so we kind of know all about that really. And but sometimes what I find is when we do things that we've been resisting for a really long time, when we sort of start to take those first steps into something, it can be really overwhelming. And that's why a lot of time we do a dip, because we can go in, put our toe in the water, and then come back out again and take time. Instead of feeling we need to do things all at once, take our time to deal with those emotions and things that are coming up for us. Okay. So I'm just looking over at the Zoom live just to check if anyone's chatting to me. And yeah, it looks like I'm still drinking my tea there, so I don't really know what's going on there. But one day I will master the whole YouTube live and get it right. But as I say, I'm a bit today because I've got a little bit of a migraine going on, and thankfully it's sort of eased off a bit. And I have been doing this quite a long time now, so it's not as stressful as certain things are when I do them the first time. But one of the hardest things I find in life, and I know this is true for a lot of people, is as actually asking for help. And I think very often when you are neurodivergent, whether it's something like migraine or PTSD or autism or something like that, we do this thing we call, masking, which is to hide. And when you get to an age, for a lot of people, like it's actually during perimenopause that these things come up, and we find we can't really hide things anymore, we can't mask anymore. And one of the things I find is that very often we hide those things from ourselves. So I don't really talk about migraine that much. Sometimes I feel like I do, and I often give a lot of advice to people on how to deal with it. But one of the reasons I don't talk about it is I find it incredibly boring. It's like, especially when you're going through a time like I am at the moment, where it's really hitting me a lot. Is if people say, "How are you?" I don't want to say every day, "Oh, actually, I'm really struggling today," and "How are you today?" "Oh, I'm really struggling today." It gets really boring. So I don't usually say it, and I don't usually tell people how difficult it is. And so that's really kind of masking as well. And it's one of those things at the moment. I'm going through stuff where I have to really examine what are the challenges and how does it make my life difficult. And what I find is every time I sort of like get to a point and I sit down, and obviously I'm filling in a form at the moment, and I go to do it, and I think, oh, it's all right. And then I get a bit stressed about a question, and I think, why am I getting so stressed about this question? And then I'll go out for a walk like I did today, and as I'm walking, I think, because it is difficult for me and I don't acknowledge that difficulty, I tend to just try and work around it, and I think I'm one of those people, that I come up with all these different ways of managing things so that I don't hit it that hard. I don't have to confront it. I kind of navigate around it. And it's, as I was walking out today, I kind of had this feeling of like, why? Why me? Why is this going on? Why this? And part of it is, I guess, just the feeling of, at a certain point, you really have to deal with things. And I think that if I wasn't going through this particular thing in my life right now, where I have to fill in these kind of forms, I would definitely keep hiding this from myself, because it's a kind of denial. It's a kind of denial to just say, I'm okay, I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm fine, and I'm not. And I think sometimes that's really, really hard to say, I'm not okay. I think during COVID, we had a kind of lot of stuff saying it's okay not to be okay. But now it seems, it can be harder to say that. And I find in the spiritual world, very often when I'm going and I'm looking for sort of answers, we're looking at sort of what's going on, I get hit so often with this whole thing of, manifest great health, manifest perfect health. And I'm just, honestly, I'm so grateful to my teachers who talk about their health issues. But my teachers, my great teachers, don't often put those health issues right like up front. It's not their story. It's not the first thing I hear about them or I know about them. And I think, with speakers, because I'm also like, I watch a lot of speakers and I listen to a lot of speaker training and that kind of thing. And for those people, I think very often, and no disrespect to anybody who's a speaker, very often I find people come out and it's like the first thing they say is, this is my story, and da, da, da. And at a certain point I stopped doing that, because I thought, you know what, I've got a million stories. And sometimes when you tell somebody your perspective of your story, it kind of, it blocks, it's more about me, isn't it? It's not about you. And as a teacher, sometimes I don't need to know your story. It's certainly not the first thing. What have you got to teach me first of all? Do you know what I mean? And then I might be interested. But Don Miguel Ruiz, I think it was like second or third book of his that I read. I read that he had heart failure, and that he'd had a heart transplant, and I didn't know that. And I don't think I knew that when I went to the first time I did like a live thing with him in Sedona. And when I did, it really sort of spoke to me, and it was like, okay, I feel really connected because of the story of like transplants in my family and with me. And I always remember going to Mexico, and I was like going to a heart, talking to him about transplants, and he was telling me all this stuff, and it was great. It was just so wonderful to talk to somebody who is so spiritual. And I say that we're all spiritual beings, we all are, but somebody who was so educated and learned in that world, to talk about these things like health and transplants, and and being so grounded and down to earth about ill health, and also the magic of something like a transplant, that gift of life. And I also remember when I read Susan Jeffers, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, and some of you might have had the same experience. I was reading this and she was saying all this stuff. And I was reading the book the first time, and I was reading it and I thought, oh, what's she talking about? She's one of these people that's never had a problem in her life, and then she started talking about having breast cancer. And I was like, whoa, this is somebody who knows what they're talking about. And also Thich Nhat Hanh, when he talks about his lung problems, and what he says is, and I love this, he says, when you have lung problems and difficulty breathing, he said, then you can be really aware every time you breathe in of the gift of that lungful of air, and being able to breathe, and how precious every breath is. And I find these are my teachers, because they never ever make me feel that I have ill health because I'm not manifesting perfect health. And I would never ever want to make anybody feel that way. But sometimes I find when I'm saying things, it can be misread, because there's this sort of, I don't know, I don't know. I think it's a bit like, I used to find this with fitness as well. And people, I love teaching people who had serious health conditions and things. And I felt like it was home for me, because I would never feel comfortable like shaming anybody, or kind of telling everybody, hey, you could look like this, and you could do this, and you could do this in 12 weeks, because I know that's not life, that's not reality. We can be really successful, even though I put pressure on myself sometimes. I wouldn't put that kind of pressure on anybody else. Sound familiar? That sometimes we put this pressure on ourselves to be healthy, or to be able to do things, that we have much more compassion for other people. So maybe, I guess, my answer to myself today, when I was walking up home and I looked at the big sky with a big thunderstorm, which was great, because I always feel before a thunderstorm it makes my migraines worse. And I remember as I came home just as the thunder, and it like started really raining, and I took my hat off and I was like, thank you, rain, because when it rains, it like alleviates that pressure, and helps ease them off a bit. They're a bit better when it's not so sort of like close as before a thunderstorm. I hope that makes sense. I know it's for a lot of people as well. And when it's hot and sunny, it can also be kind of like quite hard. But I sort of said, why me, and why? And I think perhaps one of the things I'm learning with this time in my life and having to go through all of this is to have more compassion for myself. And I often call it like compassion training, when you go through this stuff. It's like we learn to not judge other people and be more compassionate and kind and loving and caring. But actually, perhaps my journey is that I need to learn to be more compassionate with myself. And perhaps that's the journey for a lot of people, really. But I also just think that sometimes this idea of manifesting perfect health, it sort of chimes in with what's going on in, I think, the UK and probably the US at the moment, with what feels like people beating up on us for being ill and having a disability, and really, judging and shaming and pointing the finger instead of having that compassion. And I feel like, and this is not to judge anybody else really, because we have so many different pressures in our societies. But I saw a thing recently where somebody was talking in business, it was talking about somebody who was working very hard and all this kind of stuff, and who ended up having a heart attack. And I think sometimes we put this idea of working so hard as being oh, such a great thing to do, but ultimately then we cause ourselves ill health, and we also cost the country, especially in the UK, a lot of money because of the health treatments and things like that. And I guess my thing is always like, I just want to really avoid going into hospital. I want to avoid having to go to A&E again. And I can also chime that in with myself, like I'm saving the government lots of money if I don't go into hospital. So I use that for myself. And but I think it's interesting how we judge, we judge people for needing to have income support, things that keep us going when we're ill, but we might not judge people in the same way for doing things that end up costing us a lot of money because of car accidents and the police and the ambulance services and all those kind of things as well. So I think we need to be a bit more sensible, and ultimately think that actually for a lot of people, giving people support and help when they need it is the cheapest thing that we can do, because every penny that we spend on, say, looking after kids, it's money that we save in the long run, in health costs, in education, even in things like prison, and there's a lot of stuff about people with neurodivergence, and there's a very high proportion of people with neurodivergence who are in prison as well. So we need to help and support each other. But this isn't really what it's about. I thought, you know what, I'm going to come and I'm going to do a very quick one and talk about things that I don't talk about. I thought I'd dip my toe into talking about these things. This is my first time talking about some of these things, and I apologize if I'm a bit confused, I'm a bit garbled, because these aren't the things. This isn't practice, this isn't rehearsed. I'm not speaking like as if I come and stand up and speak in front of you, because I would find it very difficult to talk about this kind of thing, and I wouldn't want to really, because honestly, like I said at the beginning, talking about migraine for me is flipping boring. It's a pain in the butt. I don't like it. I much rather talk about beautiful, authentic success and escapes and joy and all of those things. And, I guess I would, yeah, as you can see, I don't find it easy to talk about. But what I always say is, for me, this is hell at times. And so I have to make the most of my good days and my good minutes. And I have to try and make my life heaven where I can. Whatever that means for me. And I have to reach out and find that heaven as much as I possibly can, and enjoy life as much as I possibly can, just to make it through all the times when it is incredibly difficult and hard. And I've learned that from a lot of people, my brother, and particularly my grandma as well. And I remember somebody asking me once, her husband was very, very ill, And she said, you know, what, or how do your family get through it? How do you get through it? And back then I remember asking my brother that week, you know, like, and he just said, we got some cake and we sat down and we were eating some cake together. And that's what he said. He said, just eat some cake. You know, that's when it's so difficult, sometimes all you can do is sit down and enjoy you know, enjoy life, enjoy a little bit of cake. um, enjoy the sweetness that life can offer, because being alive is a wonderful and beautiful thing, and being part of life is a wonderful and beautiful thing. And I'm grateful for my life, and I'm grateful for every breath that I take. And as much as at times I wonder why I have this particular condition, I also have faith that everything happens for a reason. And I have faith that one day I'm going to look back and understand. And even if I don't, in the meantime, I'm going to try and make my life as wonderful as it can be, despite everything. And when times are hard, I can look on my phone and see the photos of the really gorgeous, wonderful, and beautiful things that I have enjoyed. And I invite you all to do the same. And if you need help with that, I'm around. Not all the time because I'm not available and well all the time. But I want to help everybody to enjoy life as much as they possibly can, because it's a wonderful gift. Anyway, that's it from me. Lots of love, and